Chapter 2 of The Web of Indian Life by the Sister Nivedita, Margaret E. Noble. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2, The Eastern Mother. These 18 centuries has Europe been dreaming of the idol of the Oriental woman. For Asia is one, and the wondrous maiden of all Christian art, from the Byzantines down to yesterday. Who is she? Of what is she aware, save that she is a simple Eastern mother? Of what fasts and vigils are we told in her case that she should have known herself, or been known, as the Queen of Saints? A rapt humility, as of one whose robe was always, indeed, her veil, a touch of deep silence, and that gracious richness of maternity which we can infer from the full and rounded sweetness of the child who grew within her shadow. What more do we know of the Blessed Virgin than these things? What more we may desire to know we can learn in the East itself, in India as well as anywhere. For in the period before Islam had defined itself, overflowing Chaldea with the impulse, perhaps, of the pastoral life become aggressive, to remake the desert, in the days when Palestine and Lebanon were cultivated lands, inhabited by peasants of every type, not as yet made a burnt offering on the altar of crusading fury, in the closing centuries of the pre-Christian era, the common life of Syria had a still wider identity with that of the Hindus than it has today. The ceremonial washings of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the constant purifying of the cup and platter, the habitual repetition of a single name or prayer, which some later phase of the Christianizing consciousness has stigmatized as vain, these things were not they were what we know today as Hinduism, being merely those threads of one great web of Asiatic life that happened to touch the Mediterranean coast. And in matters so fundamental as the relation of mother and child, religious teachers come only to enforce the message of the race. Is it not said by the prophet himself that the man who kisses the feet of his mother finds himself in paradise? Yet how frail and slight and young is often the mother so tenderly adored. No Madonna of the Sistine Chapel can give that lofty purity of brow or delicate, untouched virginity of look of any one of these Hindu mother maidens, whose veil half covers, half reveals, as he rests on her left arm, her son. The picture is too central to Indian life to have demanded literary idealizing. Poetic and mythological presentments of the perfect wife there are in plenty, of motherhood none. Only God is worshipped as such by men and children, and by mothers themselves as the Holy Child. Here the half-pathos of Western maternity, with its perpetual suggestion of the brood-hen whose fledglings are about to escape her, is gone, and an overwhelming sense of tenderness and union takes its place. To one's mother one always remains a baby. It would be unmanly to disguise the fact. And yet, for her sake most of all, it is needful to play the man, that she may have a support on which to lean in the hour of darkness and need. Even a wife has no power to bring division between a mother and her son, for the wife belongs almost more to her husband's mother than to himself. There can therefore be no jealousy at the entry of another woman into his life. Instead of this, it is she who urges the marriage. Every offering is sent out in her name, and the procession that wends from the bridegroom's house to the bride's some few days before the wedding, bearing unguents and fragrant oils for the ceremonial bath, carries her loving invitation and goodwill to the new and longed-for daughter. Even in Indian home life, then, full as this is of intensity of sweetness, there is no other tie to be compared in depth to that which binds together the mother and her child. With the coming of her firstborn, be it boy or girl, the young wife has been advanced, as it were, out of the novitiate. She has become a member of the authoritative circle. It is as if the whole world recognizes that henceforth there will be one soul at least to whom her every act is holy, before whom she is entirely without fault, and enters into the conspiracy of maintaining her child's reverence. For there are no circumstances sufficient in Eastern eyes to justify criticism of a mother by her child. Their horror at the fault of Gertrude is almost exaggerated, yet Hamlet's spell is invariably broken when he speaks of the fact. To him her sin should be sacred, beyond reproach. He ought not to be able to think of it as other than his own. The freedom and pleasantries of filial sentiment in the West are thus largely wanting in that of the East. A determined stampede of babies of from 3 to 6 may, indeed, take place day after day through the room where their mother is at prayer. There may even be an attempt at such an hour to take the city by assault, the children leaping vociferously on the back of that good mother, whose quiet of conscience depends, as they well know, on her perfect silence, so that she can punish them only by turning towards them the sweetest of smiles. "Why, mother," said her family priest to one who appealed to him regarding devotions interrupted thus, "the Lord knows that you are a mother, and He makes allowances for these things." But though in the Oriental home the wickedness of 5 years old may find such vent as this, the offhand camaraderie that learns later to dub its parents mater and governor suggests a state little short of savagery, and the daughter who permits herself to precede her father is held guilty of sacrilege. The tenderness of parents corresponds to this veneration of children, and we only learn the secret of feelings so deep-rooted when we find that every child is a nursling for its first 2 years of life. Consciousness and even thought are thus awakened long before the closest intimacy is broken, and a dependence that to us in the West is but a vague imagination, to the Eastern man or woman is a living memory. How completely this may become an ingrained motive we see in the case of that Mogul who is remembered simply as the Great. For Akbar had a foster brother in the Rajput household whither his father Humayun had fled before his birth, and where his first 6 years of life were passed. Akbar's mother dying, the Rajput queen took the babe to nurse with her own son, and brought up the boys in this respect as brothers, though the guest was a Mussulman of Tamburlaine's descent, and her own the proudest Hindu blood on earth. Events swept the children apart in boyhood, and destiny fulfilling itself, he who came of a race of conquerors ascended the throne of Delhi, after many years, as Emperor of India. In them the national idea renewed itself again and again, and insurrection followed insurrection. There was one name, moreover, in every list of rebels, and men wondered at the indulgence at which the august ruler passed it by so often. At last someone ventured to point it out, protesting that justice must surely be done now. "Justice, my friend?" said the lofty Akbar, turning on his counselor. "There is an ocean of milk between him and me, and that justice cannot cross." This long babyhood creates a tie that nothing can break. The thoughts and feelings of womanhood never become ridiculous in the eyes of the Indian man. It is no shame to him that his mother could not bear a separation. It is natural and right that he should be guided by this wish of hers. None but the hopelessly degraded ever reacts against woman's weakness in active cruelty. If one asks some hard worker in his old age to what he owes his habit of industry, or his determined perseverance over detail, it is more than likely that his reply will take us back to his infancy, and the wishes that a young mother, long dead, may have expressed for him. Or the man in perplexity as to the course he should pursue will go as naturally as a child to test his question in the light of her feminine intuition. In all probability she is utterly unlearned, but he knows well the directness of her mind, and judges rightly that wisdom lies in love and experience, having but little to do with letters. Surely one of the sweetest happenings was that of a little boy of 6 who became in later life extremely distinguished. His mother, too shy to express the wish for instruction to her learned husband, confided in her son, and day after day he would toddle home from the village school, slate and pencil in hand, to go once more through his morning's lesson with her, and so, with mutual secrecy, she was taught to read by her own child. With almost all great men in India, the love of their mothers has been a passion. It is told of a famous Bengali judge who died some 25 years ago, one whose judicial decisions were recorded and quoted, even by the Englishmen who heard them, as precedents in English law. It is told of this man when on his deathbed that his mother stumbled and hurt her foot on the threshold of his room one morning, as she came after bathing to visit him. Another moment, and, weak as he was, he had crept across the floor and lay before her, kissing the wounded foot again and again, and bathing it in hot tears of self-reproach for the pain it suffered. Such stories are remembered and repeated in Indian society, not because they occasion surprise, but because they make the man's own name holy. The death scene with Os would redeem Peter Gynt himself. None who is sound in this basic relationship of life can be altogether corrupt in the rest, nor can his decisions, however adverse, be completely repugnant to us. How curious are the disputes that agitate Christendom as to the sentiment one may fittingly indulge towards the mother of the beloved son. Is her supreme position in his life not self-evident? What then could be more convincing of union with him than sweetness of feeling and words of endearment addressed to her? And so, with this wonderful simplicity, the great heart of the East sweeps aside our flimsy arguments and holds up to us the fact itself. But it is not the great alone who worship motherhood in India. Nor can I forget the long hours of one hot March day, when I sat along the bedside of a boy who was dying of plague. His home was of the humblest, a mud hut with a thatched roof. His family were Sudras, or working folk. Even his father, it appeared, could not read or write. The boy was 11 or 12 years of age, an only child, and he was doomed. The visitor's sole real usefulness lay in taking precautions against the spread of the disease. Amongst the veiled and silent women who came and went, at the other side of the little court where the boy lay, was one who slipped noiselessly to his bedside whenever she could, and exposed herself to the infection with a recklessness born of ignorance. At last I attempted to reason with her, urging her, as gently as I could, to remain at some distance from the lad, and thus avoid the danger for herself and others. She turned to obey without words, but as she went the tears poured down her poor thin cheeks, and lifting the corner of her sari to wipe them away, she tried to stifle the sobs she could not altogether repress. At that moment the words reached me from the doorway. "She is his mother." What I did can be imagined. Suddenly I discovered that the boy must be fanned, and that there was a place behind his pillow, out of the line of the air current. Here, with his head almost resting on her feet, his mother sat henceforth, crouched up, attending to her child through happy hours. Often he would grow delirious and forget her presence. Then he would toss his head from side to side, and his fever-lighted eyes stared blankly at me, while he uttered his one cry, "Ma! Ma Mataji! Mother! Mother! Honored Mother!" To my Western ears it seemed a strange cry for a child of the slums. Sometimes, as memory returned, he would smile at me, mistaking me for her, and once he snatched at my hand and then carried his own to his lips. Sweet, unknown mother, forgive me these thefts of love, that rent the veil from a graciousness so perfect, an adoration so deep. That day, alas, was their last together. All through the hours the child had struggled to repeat the name of God. Late in the afternoon he stumbled on a hymn that was much sung at the time about the streets. But he could not say it, and it was my part to take up the words and stand repeating them beside him. A smile of relief passed over his face. He lay quiet for a moment. Then his breath became shorter and shorter, and as the sun set, with his mother's eyes upon his face, he died. Of such stuff as this are the teeming millions of the Hindu people made. In moments of mortal agony, when Western lips would frame a prayer, perhaps half an oath, the groan that they utter is ever the cry of the child in his deepest need, "O Mother!" But it is easy to multiply instances. What we want is that epic of motherhood, of which each separate mother and her child are but one single line, or stanza, that all-compelling imagination of the race which must forever be working itself out through the individual. We talk glibly of Dante's vision of hell. How many of us have looked into hell, or even seen it from afar off, that we should appreciate what it means to descend there? When the gloom of insanity falls upon the soul so that it turns to rend and destroy its dearest and best, when the blight of some dread imagination covers us with its shadow, it is the lover, or the child, or servant, who will still find in our maimed and maleficent presence its chiefest good. There is one indeed whom we cannot imagine as forsaking us, one whose will for us has been the law of righteousness, and yet for whose help we shall cry out instinctively in the moment of the commission of a crime. And like the love of God in this respect is, to Hindu thinking, that of a mother, transcending the wife's, which may fluctuate with the sweetness bestowed upon it. The mother's affection, by its very nature, grows deeper with deep need, and follows the beloved even into hell. A yearning love that can never refuse us, a benediction that forever abides with us, a presence from which we cannot grow away, a heart in which we are always safe, sweetness unfathomed, bond unbreakable, holiness without a shadow. All these indeed, and more, is motherhood. Small wonder that the innermost longing of every Hindu is to find himself at home in the universe, with all that comes thereby of joy and sorrow, even as a baby lying against his mother's heart. This is the dream that is called nirvana, freedom. It is the ceasing from those preferences that withhold us that is called renunciation. The very word mother is held to be sacred, and good men offer it to good women for their protection. There is no timely service that may not be rendered to one, however young or beautiful, by the passing stranger, if only he first addresses her thus. Even a father, looking at some small daughter, and struggling to express the mystery of futurity that he beholds in her, may address her as Little Mother, and the mother of the nation, Uma Himavuti, is portrayed always as the child. thought of always as a daughter of the house. In motherhood alone does marriage become holy. Without it, the mere indulgence of affection has no right to be. This is the true secret of the longing for children. And to reach that height of worship in which the husband feels his wife to be his mother is at once to crown and end all lower ties. Who that has ever watched it can forget a Hindu woman's worship of the Holy Child? A small brass image of the baby Krishna lies, or kneels at play, in a tiny cot, and through the hours of the morning, after her bath and before her cooking, the woman, who may or may not herself be wife and mother, sits offering to this image flowers and the water of the bath, fruits, sweets, and other things, her oblations interspersed with constant acts of meditation and silent prayer. She is striving to worship God as the child Savior, struggling to think of herself as the Mother of God. She is ready enough to give her answer if we ask her, "Does my feeling for my children change according to what they do for me?" She questions in return, "Even so should one love God. Mothers love most those who need most. Even so should one love God." The simple answer is worth a world of theology, nor is it forgotten presently that the other children, made of flesh and blood, and answering to her call, are likewise His images. In every moment of feeding or training or play, of serving or using or enjoying, she may make her dealing with these an act of devotion. It was her object during the hours of worship to come face to face with the universal self. Has she done this, or has she brooded over the ideal sentiment till she has made herself the perfect mother? By her child again, her intention can never be doubted. She may turn on him now a smile and then a face of sorrow, now a word of praise and again an indignant reproach, but always equally she remains the mother. The heart of hearts of her deed is unfailing love. She knows well too that nothing her babies do can mean anything else. The sunny and the petulant, the obedient and the willful, are only seeking so many different ways to express a self-same dependence. To each she accords the welcome of his own nature. In such a reconciliation of opposites, in such a discovery of unity and variety, lies the whole effort and trend of Eastern religion. For what thought is it that speaks supremely to India in the great word Mother? Is it not the vision of a love that never seeks to possess, that is content simply to be, a giving that could not wish return, a radiance that we do not even dream of grasping, but in which we are content to bask, letting the eternal sunshine play around and through us? And yet was there ever an ideal of such strength as this, that was not firm based on some form of discipline? What then is the price that is paid by Hindu women for a worship so precious? The price is the absolute inviolability of marriage. The worship is at bottom the worship of steadfastness and purity. If it were conceivable to the Hindu son that his mother could cease for one moment to be faithful to his father, whatever the provocation, the coldness, or even cruelty, to which she might be subjected, at that moment his idealism of her would become a living pain. A widow remarried is no better in Hindu eyes than a woman of no character, and this is the case even where the marriage was only betrothal, and the young fiancée had become what we know as a child widow. This inviolability of the marriage tie has nothing whatever to do with attraction and mutual love. Once a wife, always a wife, even though the bond be shared with others, or remain always only a name. That other men should be only as shadows to her, that her feet should be ready at all times to go forth on any path, even that of death, as the companion of her husband, these things constitute the purity of the wife in India. It is told of some wives with bated breath how, on hearing of the approaching death of the beloved, they had turned, smiling, and gone to sleep, saying, "I must proceed, not follow," and from that sleep they never woke again. But if we probe deep enough, what, after all, is purity? Where and when can we say it is, and how are we to determine that here and now it is not? What is there sacred in one man's monopoly? Or if it be of the mind alone, how can any physical test be rightly imposed? Purity, in every one of its forms, is the central pursuit of Indian life. But even the passion of this search grows pale beside the remorseless truthfulness of Hindu logic. There is ultimately, admits India, no single thing called purity. There is the great life of the impersonal, surging through the individual. And each virtue, in its turn, is but another name for this. And so the idea of the sanctity of motherhood, based on the inviolability of marriage, finds due and logical completion in the still greater doctrine of the sacredness of religious celibacy. It is the towering ideal of the supersocial, as Mount Meru to a firefly compared to that of the householder, which gives sanction and relation to all social bonds. In proportion as the fact of manhood becomes priesthood, does it attain its full glory. And the mother, entering into the prison of sweet dedication, that she may bestow upon her own child the mystery of breath, makes possible in his eyes, by the perfect stainlessness of her devotion, the thought of that other life whose head touches the stars. End of Chapter 2.